Welcome to Revenge the Drive-In, the podcast where Jim and Patrick discuss two movies randomly selected from a list of over 2,000. This week's movies are 1959's The Mummy and Halloween 3: Season of the Witch, starring Tom Atkins, from director Tommy Lee Wallace and producer, composer, and I believe writer or co-writer John Carpenter.
Yeah.
I am your host, Patrick, and I am joined here by...
Jim. Hello, everybody. Hello, Patrick. Hello.
Hello, Jim. Happy Halloween. This is our last episode
Ooh.
before Halloween. And, of course, we have a Halloween film. One of the most Halloween films.
Wait, which one?
The Mummy, of course. No, I mean, like, Halloween 3 just has so much Halloween atmosphere, feel to it. I just, I really appreciate it. Even more so than the Halloween movies that actually have Michael Myers in them. I don't know what it is. It just really puts me in that Halloween spirit.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Have you seen this Mummy before? Have you seen any of the Hammer British horror movies before?
No. I never saw this Mummy before. I was pleasantly surprised.
Have you seen my mummy?
Okay. Little Doctor Who reference there.
Was it? I just did a British accent mummy joke. I didn't know that's a Doctor Who thing. Okay. I've seen like one episode of Doctor Who. What the fuck do I know?
Maybe it was that one episode. I will say, I really enjoyed this Mummy, but I still think I like the 1999 Mummy a little more, the one that you and I did a commentary track.
Yeah, I was going to mention that this is the first Mummy movie that we've featured on the podcast, but it's not the first time you and I can be heard talking about Mummy movies, because we did a commentary track on the Brendan Fraser, which you can hear on our Patreon. And that one, you had talked about that movie a lot. I knew you were a big fan of it. I enjoyed that movie a lot too. I've seen all of the Universal Mummy movies from, the 30s and 40s. I've seen, I think there's only 3 Hammer Mummy movies. I think I've seen the first 2, which are both coming up this season, obviously. I mean, this one's right here. I think the second one's coming up later. Yeah, let's talk about the Mummy and maybe the Mummy as a movie monster, because, it's got some weaknesses. I mean, there's a positive, there's a negative to everything, right? But
yeah,
the Mummy as a movie monster, not the most compelling. And then there's also the whole, and this film doesn't shy away from it. I actually like that the movie kind of brings up the idea of British exploitation of Egypt, I guess, through archaeology and everything. But there is the whole, cultural thing, the mummy is a monster. It's just kind of you couldn't create this as a new monster, a new creation nowadays.
No, and I mean, they tried and failed spectacularly with their reboot of the old, what was it, the Universal Cinematic Universe?
Oh, yes, the Dark Universe.
Here's the weird thing about all of that. So, when the Mummy was originally created as a monster back in, I guess, the 30s, right?
Well, that's when the movie first came out, but there was probably, stories going around, really, I don't know, in literature or just spoken, going back to, when those tombs first started being opened by British archaeologists, which probably goes back to, the 1890s or so, give or take? And then you have the curses, the stories of when people died, a few months or whatever after they opened one of these supposedly cursed tombs, and in actuality they died because they were exposed to diseases, to bacteria that had been just locked in there for thousands of years.
Yeah, for 4,000 years.
Yeah, but they didn't know what was up, so it's those things go back to, I mean, those kinds of stories at least predate the Boris Karloff movie, right? Because wasn't King Tut found in the 20s or something, and then
I believe it was the early 1920s.
Yeah, and he wasn't obviously the first one found, but I know that was one where a number of the archaeologists died not long after, I believe.
By the 1930s, Egyptomania has already kind of come and gone. Egyptomania was around from the late 1800s to the early to mid 1920s, before the Great Depression. So by the time that Universal comes out with like a monster movie where the monster's a mummy in the 30s, it's already kind of like an antiquated monster. Like, people are like, oh, it's a mummy, that's neat. You know, that's that thing people were crazy about a decade ago.
Okay.
You know, and then when you come out with it in the 50s, it just seems like you're like, oh, it's a mummy. You know, the only way that they make this movie interesting is that they set it in the late 1800s, right? Even continuing in the vein with like other mummy movies, the one from 99 was like a period piece, but it was full of like action and adventure, and it was exciting. The Tom Cruise one was absolutely awful. I was dragged to see it, and they tried to make it exciting by changing the location from Egypt to like the Middle East, which is where the mummy came from. So they had to like fight the Taliban and whatever to get this mummy.
Yeah, so wait a second. So isn't that, I mean, we talk about the Tom Cruise mummy as like, let's get away from Egypt. The third Brendan Fraser movie is like, let's get away from Egypt, let's get away from Rachel Weisz because we can't afford her anymore. Yeah, so you have the mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor to blame, really.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll let that one slide because they had mummies in China, whereas, you know, like mummies in the Middle East, in like Afghanistan, Iraq.
Doesn't all it take to have a mummy is like some ancient dude falls into a bog or something? I mean, don't you have like mummies preserved in like Mexico?
Yeah, well, sort of, yeah. I mean, what it
yeah,
takes...
you're the archaeology guy. You know this stuff better than me. But listen, my mummy knowledge is there's bog mummies, swamp mummies, whatever you want to call them.
You're more of a daddy guy. I get it.
What? Oh, I see what you're doing. I don't like it, but I see what you're doing.
You have people making themselves into mummies today, like Buddhist monks, and what they're doing is they starve themselves and have a little bit of water until they eventually die. They kind of dry out their insides.
Well, and then you have Ted Williams.
Yeah.
Ted Williams. I mean, I guess this is more of an Austin Powers than a mummy thing, but he froze himself, or rather his son froze him, but then I think something happened and his head was frozen separately than his body, or maybe his head came off at some point. I know there's a lot of Ted Williams missing head jokes out there. I don't remember the exact extent of them, but...
How unfortunate.
Yeah, because it's, you know how like Disney supposedly froze himself. Ted Williams, same kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people did that, right? At the turn of the at the beginning of the new millennium, you know, they're like, "Oh my God, this is the new craze, cryogenically frozen." It's like the new mummies.
It's like those guys that end up on the Enterprise D in Star Trek, in that one Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Oh yeah,
episode.
What was that one called?
Guy's
yeah,
like, I gotta check my stocks. I should be worth millions by now. Then Picard's like, hang on, dude, we don't have money anymore. What the fuck are you on about? yeah.
But then there's like that one cool country musician guy, and he's just hanging out. He's
oh yeah, he's a big Atlanta Braves fan. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, do you want to get us started on the 1959 Mummy?
So, The Mummy, starring in it, I think. Definitely Christopher Lee as the Mummy.
Yeah.
And, what's his name? Mr. Star Wars.
Yes, Mr. Grand Moff Tarkin. Yeah. Peter Cushing.
Yeah, Peter Cushing. He will always be remembered as being in Star Wars.
Which is kind of, I mean, good for him, I guess, to a certain extent, but it's also kind of disappointing, especially if you're a horror fan, and I know a lot of horror fans will still end up loving Star Wars.
He's a solid actor.
Oh, he's literally the best Dr. Frankenstein that's ever been. Like, he's awesome. He's been Sherlock Holmes, which I know everyone and his mother has been Sherlock Holmes at one point or another. I mean, that's just like one of the most widely cast roles ever. But yeah, and then he's in like all these classic British Hammer horror movies. He's Van Helsing in the Dracula series where Christopher Lee plays Dracula. He's very good in those too. It's kind of like, I mean, it's to a lesser extent, it's a bit like Alec Guinness. Like there are entire generations of people who are like, oh, Alec Guinness, yeah, it's Obi-Wan. But it's like, no, I mean, yes, you're right, but dude is like one of the most accomplished actors in the history of the world. Like, Can we not just remember him as Obi-Wan? I mean, Peter Cushing isn't the level of actor.
Let's remember when he put shoe polish on his face. How can we have to remember when he put shoe polish on his face in Lawrence of Arabia?
Oh, I thought you were just talking in his personal life.
Oh yeah,
when he went to a party with Justin Trudeau. I'm not talking about
Mr.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. The scene is set. It's 1895. There's a bunch of archaeologists trying to dig open a tomb. And by a bunch of archaeologists, I mean a bunch of hired poor people from Egypt are digging a tomb, and a bunch of white people are standing around.
Whatever the Egyptian equivalent of the Sherpa guide on the Himalayan mountain climbing things. Yeah. I'm sure there's a term for it.
There's 3 archaeologists. There's John Banning, who's played by Cushing. There's his father, Stephen, and his uncle Joseph Wemple. Fantastic name.
I mean, why is this like a family business? They're like all academics, right?
Yeah, so I guess that they're all, archaeologists. They've decided to find this long-lost tomb. And speaking of the tomb, they're looking for the tomb of Princess Ananka, which sounds like a fake Egyptian name, if I ever heard one.
Well,
at least, well,
listen, I don't know the last time I translated hieroglyphics. Okay, this is Egyptian enough sounding. Okay?
Yeah, you're right. Okay, yeah, I mean the new mummy, they call her Anaxonamun.
Ananka. I think that's the name of the princess in the 1932 Mummy, because I feel like I've heard that name in more than one movie, but I've seen a number of mummy movies. So, for instance, the mummy we have here is Karis.
Yes.
And that is the name of the mummy, not in the original 1932 Mummy, because that is Imhotep, just as it is in the 99, but Karis is the name of the mummy in all the sequels to the 1932 movie, because they're not technically sequels. I mean, it's complete. It's the Mummy Returns or whatever they're even called. The Mummy's Hand, the Mummy's Curse, and it's just not the same mummy. I don't know why that was. Could be that Ananka comes from one of those movies too, because this seems to be taking inspiration from the 40s, the Mummy sequels, just as much as it takes from the original Mummy. But yeah, Ananka, I've definitely come across that name before.
Well, Princess Ananka, she's the high priestess of the god Karnak.
Which is that a real thing?
I believe, well, Karnak's a place. I don't know if there's a god Karnak.
Well, and I guess I shouldn't be asking if an Egyptian god is a real thing. We're not trying to invoke any kind of paganism here, but you know what I mean.
We'll invoke some paganism in the next movie, that's for sure.
That's true. Of the Egyptian gods we've all heard of, we've got Osiris, we've got Ra. Mm-hmm. Osiris is the falcon, right?
I believe so. There's Isis.
Anubis is the dog.
Yeah. Isis,
that's right, yes. Which one's Isis? The god of hijacking trucks and crashing into things.
The god of attacking Christmas market in Berlin.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Anubis is like the greyhound. Yeah, and Ra is just the sun god. Right?
Yeah, he's a falcon, I believe.
Oh, is he? I thought he was just the sun. I didn't know he had an animal. I mean, I don't know this shit. Okay, listen.
Yeah.
And I don't know this shit, and I just saw the 1959 British Mummy movie. It's not like I learned much from this movie. I mean, it's a fine movie, but
no.
It's not exactly a documentary.
Well, speaking of things we learn, so we learn that John Banning, Peter Cushing, has a broken leg, so he's not out digging or watching people dig like his relatives are.
How bad is his leg break, by the way? Because he's still limping 3 years later.
Well, he never got it set properly. That's what they say.
19th century medicine. Okay. All right.
But at the very beginning, one of his relatives finds like a scarab seal on the ground, which means that they're close to the tomb. So he takes it over to John and he says, "Look, we're so close." And John goes, "Let me come." He goes, "No, you can't. But we'll get there in a couple days. Don't worry." After a couple days of digging, they finally find the entrance to the tomb. And just as they're about to break it open, a man steps out. I forget his name. Do you remember his name?
Well, he has a couple names because
Mehmet
he
Bey,
eventually,
I think that's his name.
Yeah, because he eventually goes by a different name when he illegally emigrates to Britain. This is a man in brown face, I assume.
Yeah, his name is George Pastel. That's his.
Okay, he's from Cyprus. He ends up being a bad guy, but he's sort of like who's the character in the 99 Mummy? The guy that kind of looks like
Benny.
No, not Benny. The guy that looks like
The museum guy with a fez on.
No, not him either. No.
It's the really cool guy.
Yeah.
The really cool guy, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's Ardith Bay. It's still Bay, so there's like a name similarity, and this is I guess sort of a similar character, but it's just the bad version of that. He's the protector of this sacred mummy tomb thing, which is what he is in the 99 film when he's a good guy, but he's just a little bit different.
So Mehmet Bey walks up to everybody and says, hey, look, you have to stop digging here. You cannot break the seal in that tomb. If you break the seal in that tomb, it'll lead to certain death. They go, to hell with you, I don't care. So they head on into the tomb. They find the sarcophagus of Ananka. And just as I think the father leaves to tell his son, he says, hey, we found the tomb. After he leaves, the uncle gets attacked by something after he picks up a scroll off the wall. And they hear him scream.
I thought it's the other way around. The father gets attacked.
Oh, is it the father that gets attacked?
Yeah, because he's the one who's catatonic.
Oh, you're right. You're right. It is. It is the father. My apologies. And he hears a scream, and he runs back into the tomb. And the father's kind of sprawled out across the sarcophagus, and he's mumbling in gibberish. And he's essentially catatonic, is how they describe it.
This is a little similar to the 1932 film. Again, the first person who encounters the living mummy, or the born-again mummy, whatever you want to call it, when Boris Karloff gets out of the sarcophagus, that guy just loses his mind. The mummy doesn't kill him or anything. He just screams and then laughs for 2 minutes straight as the mummy very slowly walks away. It's brilliant. I love that scene so much. So this is sort of the same idea. It's just not quite as funny because it's not as 1930s.
They decide to send the father away back to England for some medical attention. But before they leave Egypt, both John and the uncle, they decide to blow up the entrance to the tomb so nobody else can get into it.
Who are these guys? ISIS?
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Blowing up ancient artifacts.
Mehmet Bey is off to the side with this scroll of life that the father had picked up off the wall in the tomb. And he is speaking to the god, Christ, what's the god's name again?
Oh God, yeah. I want to say it was one.
Karnak.
Yeah, if it's an Egyptian god, it's one I'm not familiar with.
So he's speaking to Karnak, and he says, I will avenge you. I will hunt down these people. I will use your will to take vengeance on the people who dare to look upon the face of your handmaiden. A little hokey, but I'll give it to him. 3 years later, we're now in England. And we hear, actually, I think first we run into a couple of drunks, right?
Yeah, we got our obligatory
English
comic relief
drunks.
scene.
Yeah.
It'd be more fitting if they were Scottish, but nah, just kidding. Everyone in Britain drinks. I feel like the Hammer movies do this a lot, where it's just, it feels very Shakespearean.
And it's unfortunate.
And I don't mean the Shakespearean in a good way. I mean, if you read a Shakespeare tragedy, you've got all these really, really, really great scenes, and then here's the scene with the porter in Macbeth, where it's just it was actually a pretty good scene, a pretty funny scene, but it's cut out of every single stage version of Macbeth because the play just stops to have a comedy scene, and that's what these guys kind of feel like.
They serve only one plot point, and then
they serve the most important plot point. They fuck everything up.
Well, do they? They fuck one thing up.
Well, they drop the mummy into the swamp.
Into a bog, yeah. Yeah.
They essentially loosen the mummy. I feel like that's probably a big deal.
So after we get introduced to these drunks who have been hired to move Mehmet Bey's stuff to a rented house, who is now going under the alias of Mehmet Atkill, we see John interacting with his father, who has come out of his catatonic state. He says to John, he goes, what attacked me was a mummy. I picked up the scroll of life, I read from it, and I was attacked by the mummy Karis. who I brought back to life, the High Priest of Karnak. And John doesn't really believe him. He just kind of shoos his father off. He's like, you're a crazy old man. You guy who's been in a catatonic coma sort of state for the last 3 years.
Yeah, you haven't spoken for the last three years or so, and then you're just like, oh, Christopher Lee attacked me. It's like, oh. If Christopher Lee attacked you, there was probably very good reason. You were probably a Nazi spy or something, and he just had to take care of this.
Absolutely, yeah. So while that's going on, these drunk guys hop into their carriage, and again, they're like piss drunk. They hop into the carriage loaded with Mehmet Bey's stuff.
Well, we say piss drunk. This is legal driving in Britain, right?
Yeah. You have to have a mandatory 5 or 6 drinks before you get behind the wheel,
or behind the horse, I guess, right?
Well, there's actually a great line, speaking of that, where they come out and one of the guys goes, horse, they're a man's best friend. And the guy goes, no, that's a dog. Yeah. And he's like, no, this is a horse. We're not that dog.
Yeah, that was actually kind of funny. I enjoyed that.
So these drunks, they're cruising along down a road. They hit like a bump before a bridge.
Well, specifically, they're going really fast because there's a guy in the asylum like knocking on the window and shouting out at them. So they're like afraid of him. And it was really confusing for a second because we eventually get the mummy attacks in the asylum and the mummy wrecks his shit. But I almost thought like you see that and you're almost thinking like, oh my God, is the mummy in there? Is the mummy doing something because we still haven't seen the mummy doing shit, even though he's probably done shit.
And you're right, and those two fellas are scared. So this box like falls off the back of their carriage and thunks into a swamp and is just swallowed whole.
Yep.
It's disgusting.
Before we proceed, I just want to say one of the highlights of this movie for me was just the sets. I love the bog set.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I mean, it's obviously a set, but it's great. The mummy tomb set is fantastic.
It is, yeah.
And even the house interiors, which
Mehmet Bey's house, I like
his house is insane. Peter Cushing's house, like, archaeologists must get really well paid, and I guess this is like the golden age of archaeology too. So maybe they were really well paid back then.
I know this was taking place in like
1898 at this point, because this is a few years after the original events.
Well, the thing I liked about this is, like, in Mehmet Bey's house, which we'll get there eventually, but he has a big kind of statue of Karnak in a room. And I'm like, wow. Like,
this looks like Anubis to me, but okay.
Exactly, yeah.
Like a fatter Anubis.
Like a fatter, lazier Anubis.
He's just big boned.
People probably had that in their house in Britain in the late 1800s, something like that. You know what I mean? When Egyptomania was
like non-Egyptian, like no one that like worshipped that, but like just a person whose like friend was an archaeologist and he just like took that from a temple and was like, here, do you want this, like that kind of thing? Yeah, it's possible.
And and I would have said yes if I was offered that. I would have said absolutely. Stephen has been moved downstairs into like a different room of the asylum because he's too volatile. He was breaking out all the windows, so they have to put him in like a secured room.
He still has a window, it's just like well above his head.
Yeah, and has like a metal grate over it or something. The next day, the drunks and the constable get together, and they're like, yeah, we were going too fast and we lost something off the back of our carriage. And Mehmet Bey walks up and says, oh, so I guess we'll never get it back? He goes, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, sir. What was in that box anyways? He says, oh, just some Egyptian relics, that's all. That night, Mehmet Bey goes back and takes out the Scroll of Life and reads from it and causes mummy Christopher Lee to rise out of the bog and stride out of it covered in muck and gross gunk.
Yeah, I like my favorite mummy appearance in this movie is when he's just covered in just gross shit and stuff, because this mummy, overall not my favorite look of a mummy. He's not really the bandage mummy type. He's more just, I mean, this probably is how bandage mummies work, where like maybe the bandages of just like, they're just like part of his body now because the tissue and stuff over thousands of years. But he's kind of just a dirty mummy. He's not really like a bandage, like your traditional your Halloween costume mummy, if you will. He's a little grosser. He's a little uglier.
Yeah, he's definitely a little worse for wear.
Yes, but he looks best when he's just got all this crap all over him. He just looks awesome.
After Christopher Lee has risen, he's sent to kill Stephen in the mental institution. I don't know how you feel about Christopher Lee's motions or movements. I don't know. To me, they looked a little silly. You know, like after he starts...
Oh, yeah. At the end of the day, you got like a mummy zombie. It's like it's a dated monster, not just in the cultural side of things, but it's a dated monster even just like, how do you make this thing scary? So I do agree that like the emotions just kind of like, you know, he's doing his best. But yeah, not perfect, but I also don't necessarily know how you make it a whole lot better. I will say I at least like Christopher Lee's size, his height, his broad shoulders do kind of give the mummy an intimidation factor. I think that's appreciated.
Yeah, because he's a tall guy. Like, I think he's taller than like all the other actors in the movie. Karras makes his way to Stephen, and he scales the wall of the asylum and breaks into his room and kills him. Yeah. And the mummy escapes, and nobody knows who did it. They think that a crazy person just kind of broke in and killed him.
Yeah, the police inspector, whatever, he says, like, were there not clear signs of, like, forced entry from the outside, I would just assume it was one of the patients here, because this was clearly a crazy person. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and he's half right.
Is he? Would we call the mummy a crazy person?
I'd call Mehmet Bey maybe a crazy person. I guess you're right.
Yeah, the mummy, this is maybe a little disappointed, a little source of disappointment for you mummy fans out there. But the mummy is basically just a tool in this movie. It was very Halloween 6 Michael Myers. Yeah. He just kind of follows orders, and yeah, it's not the kind of mummy action I'm seeking, I think. But whatever.
Mehmet Bey, who is still looking to get revenge on everybody, sends Karras out the next night to kill Uncle Joseph Wemple, Uncle Joe. He's in John's house, I believe, and we get this awesome shot of the mummy just kicking open the front doors. And they essentially explode outwards, and he comes flying in and starts choking Uncle Joe to death. I believe Peter Cushing shoots him with a revolver, I think, right? But it doesn't stop the mummy.
He shoots him two or three times.
Yeah.
And he claims from a distance of 3 meters because he's talking to the cops afterwards. Inspector Mulrooney, I think was his name.
Those bullets did nothing to stop Karras.
The bullets, I don't know if I think you would still call them squibs, even though I'm used to squibs being with blood and everything. This movie has incredible squibs for the time. The little effect of the mummy costume being shot looks awesome. There's like a little puff of like it's almost like you hid like a firecracker in Christopher Lee's costume or something. It looks really cool. Like you don't usually see that in old movies like this, movies from the 50s. I'm just thinking of like I've seen a bunch of westerns, people always get shot and you don't see a damn thing. They just fall over. This was pretty neat. Like you can see that those bullets are hitting him. So until at a certain point they don't, and that's in the climactic scene. You have him get shot.
Yeah, exactly.
And it looks awesome. And then they just keep shooting him, and you don't see anything. They got lazy.
Then it looks
there.
a lot less awesome.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next awesome squib shot. The next night, so after Banning tells the inspector, he goes, "Look, nothing could stop this mummy. It's a mummy. I'm telling you, this is what I saw, and I'm going to be the next victim." The next night, John is hanging out in his study, and he notices that there's quite a resemblance between his wife and
Ananka.
There's also a great line here that made me laugh out loud.
That was a great line. Yeah,
he said, "Yeah, she was thought to be the prettiest woman in the world," and his wife goes, "Oh, that's flattering." And he said, "Well, remember, dear, the world was quite small at that time."
Yeah, yeah, that is a really funny joke. I don't know how old. I'm gonna look this up. How old is Peter Cushing at this time? But I mean, he's not. I mean, he seems maybe older than he was.
Yeah, but it's only like 13, 14 years later he's in Star Wars, and he looks like an old man.
He was born in 1913, so what's that? Yeah. He's in his mid-40s here. So he's not
better
as
than
yeah, but he's still kind of this like scrawny kind of British weirdo looking guy. Let's talk about his smoking hot wife, okay? Like, what did he do to get this woman?
An archaeologist, man. He loves playing.
Yeah, again, archaeology paid very well back then. This is French-born actress Yvonne Furneaux, I suppose is how you'd pronounce that, right?
Yes, yeah.
Still alive. At least when we're recording this, born in 1928.
Wow, so she was like a solid 20 years younger than Cushing.
Yeah, we're 15. Worked with Federico Fellini, Roman Polanski, and Michelangelo Antonioni, the filmmaker I've made fun of a lot on this podcast. So, okay. As well as Terence Fisher, which they don't list that in the lead of the Wikipedia article. They bury that lead. But, Terence Fisher, he's a horror legend. I don't know how well known he is compared to like a John Carpenter, the more modern horror filmmakers, but he made so many great British horror movies in the 50s and 60s. Like, he probably should be more celebrated and respected even than he is, but a lot of people still know about him, and yeah. Because he did the Horror of Dracula. He did the first Christopher Lee Dracula movie. He did the first two Frankenstein movies, I think, which those are both great. I mean, he probably did other Dracula movies in the series too, and then I know he did some other ones. Because some of the best Hammer horror movies from the 50s, 60s, early 70s were actually the non-franchise movies. They were just like the random. Like, there's a movie called Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, which is pretty freaking great. There's just like random like one-off vampire movies. Some of those are really awesome, and I know he did some of those, I'm sure. So maybe not quite as accomplished as Roman Polanski, but hopefully with less of a rap sheet at least.
Okay. Okay. No more Roman Polanski. Let's get back to this movie. When Karras does make his way to John, this is where I first took notice of the really awesome squibs when he shoots him twice with like a shotgun or a rifle or something. The mummy's chest just kind of like blows up.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really neat. Well, then the poor cripple that John is then flips himself over a desk and then grabs like an arrow from above his bookcase and stabs him through the gut, which is really cool too.
Amazing stuff. And then just the rest of the scene, he's got this arrow sticking out. Because even though the arrow breaks, so like the front of the arrow isn't there, you still got the back of the arrow just sticking out his back.
He starts choking John. His wife, Isabel, runs into the room with her hair down. And again, she looks very much like the lady.
Ananka.
I can't remember her name. Yeah, that's it. And Karras kind of stops in his tracks.
Then he kind of just leaves this scene, doesn't he? He doesn't take her.
No, he just kind of walks away with an arrow in him. He just kind of leaves.
Yeah, he slumps on back home, which home is only like a couple doors away or something. They live in the same neighborhood.
Well, then speaking of that, John has a feeling that the mummy lives in the neighborhood and has moved into the house next door. So he goes and knocks on the door and comes face to face with Mehmet Bey, who was actually leaving or getting ready to leave to go back to Egypt because he thought his job was done. He thought...
Yeah, because when Karras returns home, he starts doing this like prayer thing, and he's like, okay, the job's done, all three, because the frickin' mummy can't talk, and he sees the mummy back, like, okay, you took care of business. But so I kind of like that. Like, there's not like a big reaction, but you can imagine him, he's opening the door, and he's just thinking, oh, shit. I thought this was done.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, because I never really noticed it until this point in the movie, but those two characters never met each other. So, I mean, if John had met Mehmet Bey in Egypt, maybe things would have been solved a little quicker.
This is probably my favorite scene in the movie. Almost every line of dialogue has like two meanings here.
Yeah.
Because the two are talking, and Peter Cushing is trying to find out if he's the guy, if he's come to kill them and curse them, and if he's going to have a mummy hiding around. And then every line Mehmet Bey has is like condemning the British, condemning British archaeologists for what they're doing, even if he's being kind of subtle about it. So really well written scene. Also gorgeous house, gorgeous interiors, as we kind of talked about earlier.
Well, exactly, yeah. So it's Mehmet Bey's house where he has that giant statue of Karnak.
which he hides behind a revolving, or not a revolving, but like a sliding wall. Thankfully, because otherwise,
like a big 4-paneled door or something.
And the sarcophagus, thankfully, is also easily hidden, because that would probably raise some eyebrows.
Well, I also like this scene because they talk about religion at one point.
Mehmet Bey uses like the present tense at one point, and then he's like, well, there surely can't still be people that worship Karnak or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole time he's talking about, he's like, well, there are, and let me tell you, there's strength behind it.
Oh yeah, because he insults him. He's like, well, it wasn't Karnak like a minor deity or something, and which is great, because I think
Anubis.
I think he knows what's going on at this point, so he's just trying to like insult this guy, and then he's like, well, but to people that really followed Karnak, Karnak was the shit, which that's probably fair. But yeah, this is the scene where where Mehmet Bey actually like raises questions that I didn't necessarily expect a movie made in the 50s to raise about the British plundering of artifacts and stuff like that. I mean, listen, I'm not saying the movie came down on the side that a movie today would probably come down on, but I at least like that that issue is raised. I think there seems to be something very modern about that, because that's brought up all the time with the British Museum, and for some reason everyone ignores all the other museums in the world that have done the same damn thing for the most part. It's just the British Museum always gets ragged on. Greece especially has a problem with it, because a lot of the Greek artifacts were sold to the British, but they were sold by the Ottomans, who controlled Greek land at the time. So it's like, okay, they even though they were sold and purchased legitimately, they weren't sold by the Greek people. But then you have the aspect of like, well, who do artifacts truly belong to? Can that, like, there's a lot of like, this is a current debate, and this movie is sort of touching upon it.
It's interesting because to just talk about that debate for a second, I mean, like, when it comes to a place like Egypt, you had the British who were working directly with the Egyptian government at the time, and both the Egyptian and French governments were allowed to come in and take artifacts that were signed off as okay by the Egyptian government. There's obviously like a lot more depth and stuff revolving around this period that I'm not going to get into.
Oh yeah, there's colonial powers and everything. I mean, there's, I guess, the ultra pro British Museum, or pro, I don't want to say pro-colonial necessarily, but let's say the pro-British Museum perspective would be that these artifacts, these, whatever, would not be preserved were they not for Britain. That's a little bit of the argument, I guess.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, the British Museum's free to get into.
But it's in Britain, if you're from Egypt and you want to partake in your country's ancient history, you have to fly and everything, and you got the COVID protocols and all that nonsense.
You got the COVID, you got the plane tickets. Yeah, I mean, there's many sides to this argument. I'm more for one side than the other, but that's also because
you're a filthy white person.
Because I'm a filthy white colonialist. But that's also because there's a line in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade that I remember, and it's when
Indiana
he's on the
Jones,
ship.
famous
plunderer.
No, I was going to say famous ethical archaeologist who never took any gold idols from places where they were held for thousands of years. Okay.
Well, remember the third one.
Though it belongs in a museum
line,
I assume is the one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's like, it belongs in a museum.
But yeah, anyways, this is going back to the movie. This great scene. This really is my favorite scene in the movie. Just really well acted by Peter Cushing. The guy playing Mehmet Bey, he's okay. He does his best. It's a pretty good accent. I don't know if it's truly Egyptian sounding, but it's at least a consistent accent. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's in brownface. I get it. But, I don't know. I don't know. I can't really conclude that thought, but,
So to get back to the climax here, John leaves Mehmet Bey's house, and Mehmet Bey kind of says, shit, I gotta take care of this guy. I thought this was over and done with, but I gotta take care of him. And he's apologizing to Karnak, and he's got to read from the Scroll of Life again and get Christopher Lee back up out of bed.
his standing grave.
His standing stone bed.
Who we completely skipped this, by the way, but there was a very, 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 very long flashback scene.
Oh, yes, yeah.
When Peter Cushing was speaking to the cop about what he thinks is going on, and there's the thing, the mummy, I guess, to sum it up quickly, Karras was in love with Ananka, and he wanted her to have eternal life or something.
He was in love with her, but she was the wife of, like, the pharaoh or whatever, right? Wasn't that it? And they couldn't get together because of that. So didn't she kill herself, and he was going to bring her back to life? So that they could be together
she's
forever?
Dead. But then he ends up getting... How does he get mummified?
He starts reading from the Scroll of Life to bring her back, but as soon as he does that, this king's guards break in, and everybody catches him.
So he's charged with, like, blasphemy or something, probably, right?
Yeah, well, to punish him, they decide to mummify him alive, which wrapping him in bandages and putting him in a stone box isn't really how you mummify somebody. But he was guarded with mummifying.
After... You have to pull the brains out through the nose. There's like it's a whole process. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, it's a mummification. It's a whole thing. Yeah. So Karras was forced to stand as like a bodyguard over Ananka's tomb for the rest of time, and you could bring him back to kill blasphemers and people who looked on her face by reading from the Scroll of Life, which is what John's father did at the very beginning of the film that we didn't see.
And well, you say that was... We have two flashbacks. We have one that's the really long one. We also have the flashback when John's father is telling him about what happened to him. And then we see Mehmet Bey actually in the tomb in that scene.
Yes.
Two flashbacks, one really long, one not so long, but both within like 20 minutes of each other or something. They seem to, maybe more than 20 minutes, but they seem to be almost too close to each other in the movie, where I felt like the movie felt really slow at that point because of the flashbacks and everything.
So to get back to this climax here, which is actually a pretty decent climax for this movie. Karras is sicked on John again, and he knocks out a couple police officers standing guard outside of John's house and stuff. Karras heads into the study, finds John, starts immediately choking him, and then kind of like alerted by his cries for help and noise and the kerfuffle going on, Isabel runs into the room. Because it worked last time, she shouts at Karras and she's like, "Stop!" But she doesn't have her hair down, so she doesn't look like like Karras's love. So John has to yell as he's being choked to death. He has to yell.
I didn't notice the hair was essential to this part earlier in the movie, because I feel like it's kind of... I know you mentioned it when we were talking about this, but I don't think the movie really focused on the hair.
Yeah. So she quickly undoes her hair and puts it down and orders Karras to stop, and he does. And then Mehmet Bey walks in and says, "What are you doing? Kill them. Kill her." Karras refuses. Mehmet Bey goes to stab her, but big 6'10" Christopher Lee walks over and just kind of wraps one arm around him and then like rips the knife out of his hand and then like breaks his back against his knee and then leaves him on the floor.
Yeah.
And Isabel, so shocked, she kind of like passes out.
She passes out because that's what women do when they're picked up by monsters. There's no real explanation for it. I mean, it's just because he picks her up and she just immediately... And it's like, oh, they're still doing that in the late 50s. Okay, because that's like such like an old thing, right?
It is, yeah. So Karras and Isabel take a bit of a stroll down to the bog.
That lovely, lovely swamp set again. Looks better here at night, I think, than it did during the day, too.
Yes, yeah. Karras starts walking into the bog with Isabel, and she wakes up and says, "Stop, put me down." And Karras lets her go, because how can you say no to a beautiful woman? Especially one that looks like your 4,000-year-old dead girlfriend. Especially
one that looks like she'd be Peter Cushing's granddaughter, I guess. Right? I mean, I was actually surprised
exactly.
that only 15 years between those actors. I would have expected more than that, actually.
Yeah, well...
It's actually less of an age gap than what we have in Halloween
movie?
3. Yeah, because that's a pretty fucking
weird-ass
relationship, too.
But the best part about the climax in this movie we get like a dozen police officers standing around the bog with like rifles. And Peter
Anyways,
Cushing says,
they just started blasting.
Yeah, so anyway, I started blasting. That's exactly it, yeah. Yeah, Peter Cushing kind of like gets Isabel to come over in his direction. He goes, honey, when I yell, stay low. She's already in like neck-deep bog water. He's like, oh, get lower, honey. So then he screams, now! And all the police officers just open fire on the mummy. And he's just like spinning around from the force of all these bullets.
We do get a close-up of like a couple of squibs, but then after that, it's just Christopher Lee just pretending to get shot. There's nothing really.
Yeah.
But I do love that we get that close-up at least.
So Christopher Lee, poor old Christopher Lee, pretends to get shot after actually getting shot, and then slowly, very slowly starts to sink in the bog while gripping the scroll of life. Kind of like a Terminator 2 ending.
Yeah, well, it's less heroic, but you're right. He is holding the thing like above his head, the scroll.
And he sinks
then he
below
gives one final thumbs up as he goes.
Yeah, and he sinks below the surface of the bog. And much in the fashion of these older movies, the movie ends right there.
Yeah, I was surprised. I thought that was something we left in the 30s or 40s. I thought that was just a universal thing. I did not expect just like boom credits in this movie.
That's The Mummy from 1959. Patrick, thanks for putting up with my lack of notes and going off this completely by memory.
That's what I did with A Nightmare on Elm Street, which, I mean, it's a
but you're
I've
better
seen
at
dozens of times. Well, I've seen A Nightmare on Elm Street dozens of times. This is probably this was the first time you saw The Mummy.
It was. I did enjoy it, though. So actually, let me start. I enjoyed this movie.
Sure.
All the acting was fine. I didn't have a problem with any of the actors, which some of these older movies, they can be a little distracting.
All the main players are fine. Peter Cushing, solid performer, as always.
Even Christopher Lee in those flashbacks, he's really good. But the sets were all fantastic.
Yes.
All the Egypt sets. I've never been to Egypt, but I'm going to assume they don't exactly look like that. But
well, there's, as I think I joked
enough
in the commentary track, there's no McDonald's, in this tomb. When if you're making it look like real Egypt, it's just going to be trash on the ground everywhere.
But Patrick, what did you think about this fantastic, fun movie?
Well, don't speak for me. I do enjoy the movie quite a bit. I think I kind of mentioned the issues I have with it towards the end, where we have that lengthy flashback, which comes a little bit too late in the movie, I think. Like, I think we would have... I mean, I know what's going on in the story because I've seen mummy movies before, but I think in terms of just storytelling, I think the exposition really needs to come a little earlier. Peter Cushing's awesome. Pretty convincing limp, I will say. If we're talking about his physical acting, which is not something I normally bring up with Peter Cushing. Christopher Lee... Not my favorite mummy, but an intimidating presence. Mainly his size. I think you see a little bit too much of his eyes. I wish they did something a little bit, because whenever they did the facial close-ups, his eyes move a lot. He shifts them around a lot.
Yeah, he's a shifty mummy.
Yeah, I would have liked maybe like a gross kind of contact look on him, which I don't know if they really did that in the 50s. But I like the movie. The last 15 minutes or so... Well, honestly, I mean, the climax, the last 10, 15 minutes or so, is exciting. But even going back to the scene preceding that, I've mentioned a number of times my favorite scene of the movie. So I'll say like the last half hour or so is like riveting. I loved all that stuff. So even if it kind of took us a while to get there and it wasn't the most satisfying ride, all makes it worth it in the end. I do enjoy the movie quite a bit. Might even prefer it to the 32 Mummy. I'd have to see that movie again. It's got the same general plot, but it's very different because the mummy is wandering around. I'm going to correct myself. I don't remember what the cool dude's name is in the 99 Mummy. Ardith Bey, it might be that guy's name, but Ardith Bey is the name that Imhotep goes by when he's a human in the 1932 Mummy. I just realized that. So yeah, you got Boris Karloff wandering around doing things, and Boris Karloff as the mummy in the 1932 version, I think he's more probably similar to Mehmet Bey, even though he has that initial appearance like, the traditional cloth-bound mummy, the Christopher Lee type thing. But
gotcha.
But yeah, I might prefer this one. This is a very good one. This is one of the better Hammer horror films from the late 50s into the they had a great run from 57 or so into about 74, 73.
Well, I can say as my first Hammer horror film, I enjoyed it.
I'm going to correct you there.
Oh, no.
You weren't a part of this episode, but the Quatermass Experiment is
yes.
a Hammer film, and you have seen that.
I have.
I did a little bit of research on this at some point a while ago. I think Hammer kind of started as sort of like B-movies. They made a few science fiction movies, Quatermass, and maybe something else around the time, and that kind of got them a lot of money. And then it was really 57 is when they went all in on like gothic horror, and that's what really kind of launched them into a main British studio. Possibly a little, I say main, probably a little bit of a cult appeal, just because horror. But, you know, those movies at least got international distribution. I think this one had Warner Brothers. A lot of them had Universal. Universal owns the rights to a lot of those movies, too, I think, because they're so closely related with the Universal monsters, because they're essentially like remakes. Like, I know the Hammer Frankenstein movies, it's unlike the Universal series where it's a different monster every movie because it follows the scientist, the Dr. Frankenstein. They never quite recreate the classic Boris Karloff monster look, and it's because they didn't have the rights to that, like makeup or something. So even though those movies are great, all the monsters fucking suck. They all look terrible if you ask me. but that's a movie. I mean, Peter Cushing is the real monster in those movies, though, which is what makes them amazing. But
well, speaking of real monsters, let's talk about the monster.
Let's talk about the Irish.
Yeah, I was gonna say the Irish or pagans. Sex between two consenting adults, but one looks 17 and one looks to be in his 50s.
I didn't think she looked 17, but she looked half his age. Yeah. Oh, he does ask her how old she is, which I don't know about you. I have found in my personal life that is always the most romantic thing that I can ask a woman.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, babe, I'm ready. Oh, wait, hold on. How old are you?
Yeah.
Always ask a woman.
Can I see your ID first, please?
Yeah. You must be this tall and this old to ride this ride.
128, honey, I'm sorry. You're at least 145, please. So, Halloween 3 is a special movie. I think at this point it's earned a place in the heart of a lot of horror fans, but when this came out originally, it was vastly hated. You'll still find people who hate it, including Josh, who has been on this podcast to talk about the first two Halloween films. But the main reason people hate it, the reason people hated it at the time, was this came out in 1982. Halloween came out in 78. Halloween 2 came out in 81. Those are both Michael Myers movies. Michael Myers dies at the end of Halloween 2, but as we've seen in every slasher movie ever, you can always get around that. You can always find a way. There's no Michael Myers in Halloween 3. They went a different route. It was John Carpenter's plan to do like an anthology series kind of thing.
Yeah.
Kind of like what Cloverfield's ended up doing, although Cloverfield has done it as a marketing ploy and to try and trick people into watching Cloverfield movies that aren't really Cloverfield movies.
This could have been a really good movie, or his idea would have been a really good idea, had this movie just been a little bit better. You know what I mean? Had it not been titled Halloween, or had it not been part of the quote-unquote Halloween franchise, or the first one to divert from that, I think it could have done a lot better. And I will say, I've seen this movie multiple times. So you told me, you're like, hey, like, you know, next week we're doing Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, and The Mummy from 59. And I started watching Halloween 3, and I was like, holy shit, I've seen this movie like a dozen times. I never knew that it was a Halloween movie.
Really?
So I've always watched on television around Halloween.
Okay. Right.
and I just never knew it was a Halloween
Did you just not
movie.
know what the title was?
No, I would just watch it, and I just wouldn't change the channel, and I'd be like, oh, I remember this movie.
So this movie, John Carpenter does not direct. He does the score along with Alan Howarth. Howarth, I still don't know how to say that name.
Yeah.
He is producer. Looks like he's not the writer. I thought he might have been the writer. But yeah, this movie still feels like a John Carpenter movie in a lot of ways. It has one of his best musical scores, I would say. I think I'd probably put the Christine score above it, and maybe...
I like how it opens with that kind of...
spacey.
Really
There's almost
80s...
like sound effects are part of the score.
Yeah.
So first off, if you haven't seen this movie, if you wrote it off because it's not got Michael Myers in it, or you wrote it off because all the Halloween sequels are trash. You're mostly right about that one, about the latter. But I still think this is a movie well worth watching. As long as you just don't expect it to be like a Michael Myers. It's not even a slasher movie. It's like this weird supernatural sci-fi horror kind of thing.
Just go along with it. Go with the flow. Don't expect it to be a Halloween movie. It's just its own Halloween branded movie.
Yeah, I would say the nearest comparison I would have with this movie. It's a movie that we've done on the podcast.
The Stuff.
Yeah, it was the movie that we did in the Halloween 2 episode. Josh and I covered Halloween 2 and The Stuff. It's very satirical. There's a satirical element to, we're looking at capitalism and greed and corporate greed and all that stuff, consumerism. But it also gets a lot crazier than that. And that all comes from the villain, who proves that all Irish people, and nothing is more frightening than an Irish person. At any rate, we start out October 23rd. There's a man running for his life at night, hiding from a car in like a junkyard. A person in a suit attacks him, but he's able to free himself by getting I was going to say parked car. I guess it's not in park. That's the problem. But he gets a car to come and crush him, freeing himself.
Which is the slowest car crush in the history of car crushes.
It pins him between two cars, yeah, I guess. It doesn't need to go fast, as long as it just pins him, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So this man gets to a gas station where we see two things on the television. This is an old, like, way out in the middle of nowhere kind of gas station, at least that's what it appears to be. There is an ad for Silver Shamrock, a Halloween mask company that is doing a big Halloween special / giveaway on Halloween night. And there's also a little news story that we just see a little bit of about how part of Stonehenge is missing. Let's talk about Stonehenge. You've seen Stonehenge, right? You've been there?
Yes, yeah.
How big are we talking for this? I understand the weight is the bigger issue than the size, but like let's paint a picture in our listeners' minds here.
All those stones on the outer ring are blue stones, as far as I'm aware. And the stone that you see at the end of the movie looks about twice the size, maybe even three times the size. I was going
to say, I thought that was bigger than Stonehenge was when you finally see the thing.
The problem is you can't get super close to Stonehenge, so listeners, I would say...
Well, it's because Chevy Chase in European Vacation ended up backing his car into it and knocking it all over. That's why they won't let you near it.
Rough estimation from 10 years ago, the stones are probably something like 20 feet high, maybe 15 feet high.
Okay.
5 to 8 feet wide and several feet thick, for sure. Like, they're huge.
But you're right. What we see at the end of the movie is much bigger than that. Probably 2 times as big, at least. At any rate, this man gets into the gas station. There's a little jump scare when he frightens the gas station attendant. He collapses. He's clutching a pumpkin mask, which we have seen already as one of the Silver Shamrock masks.
Mm-hmm.
Then we meet our protagonist, Dr. Dan Chalice. Probably, I don't want to say, part of me wants to say he's like the worst protagonist ever, but I don't mean that in that he's, I just like, if you're structuring a movie, this is not your protagonist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's such a weird person to lead, to captain this movie, but I think that's part of what makes it really special. But anyways, he's Tom Atkins.
Everybody loves Tom Atkins.
Who's a middle-aged drunk doctor in this film. Tom Atkins, of course, star of The Fog with director John Carpenter. He's in that. Mm-hmm. He sleeps with Jamie Lee Curtis in that movie, by the way, as far as that's even a worse age gap, I think, or maybe about the same. He's a minor role in Lethal Weapon. You know, you and I have talked a lot about like middle age and, you know, grandpa action and stuff like that. I think yeah. I think he would have been he never quite had that like big action lead role, but I think he would have been perfect for it. You know what I mean? Because he's got this like badass presence about him, and I've seen him with guns a lot, and I've seen him shoot people, but he's never like the lead action guy in like, because this isn't an action movie.
I think if he had been that age today, maybe he would have been like in a good grandpa action movie.
Dr. Dan Chalice, as I said, he's a drunk. He arrives home. His wife hates him. His wife is played by, I don't remember if it's Annie. I get the two characters mixed up, but she's one of Jamie Lee Curtis's friends in Halloween. It's a small role. You hear her nagging him on the phone a few times, and by the way, like I say nagging, but no, she's 100% in the right. This guy's an awful father, awful husband.
He's a bit of an alcoholic.
Oh, more than a bit.
He's a big alcoholic. He's a doctor and an alcoholic, which is something that shouldn't be mixed, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Passing off his kids on his wife, apparently. Although he doesn't do that in this movie. Things actually come up and he passes his kids off.
Well, but he still just takes off, doesn't tell the family about, like, anything that he's we're talking Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters level of just awful father, I think. He's that bad. But anyways, so he arrives home. He gets his kids some Halloween masks, but they already have their Silver Shamrock masks, which they're excited about. So the Silver Shamrock masks, we see the ad again. And I do like, first of all, the whole Silver Shamrock jingle thing. Absolute earworm. You will struggle to get it out of your head after you've seen this movie. Partially, I mean, it is just genuinely very catchy. But it also, you hear it like dozens of times in this movie. And that's by design. And I like how there's even characters in the movie that are annoyed with it. I mean, it just after a while, you kind of, like the mother here in this scene just is just like, well, you turn that shit off or something.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Silver Shamrock as a company. Dominate the Halloween mask market, apparently. We learn that later. But they make 3 masks. What is this company?
Yeah.
You could probably make a shit ton of money nowadays if you made, like, I know I'm going to say these aren't masks, but the Halloween costumes. If you made, let's say, if you're a Halloween company, you only want to make 3 costumes, but you want to make as much money as possible. What costumes do you make? I'd say Harley Quinn has to be one of them, right?
Yeah.
I'd probably say Batman, especially because that'll be more for kids, but Harley Quinn more for adults.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, Spider-Man seems to be, you see more Spider-Man than Superman. Yeah, I'll give you that.
Or like if you want one for adults, specifically for adult women, it would be like Sexy
That's
Cat.
Harley Quinn.
Oh yeah, Harley Quinn, you're right. Sexy Harley Quinn.
Sexy Harley Quinn has overtaken Sexy Cat Lady.
Sexy Cat Lady.
Not to be confused with Sexy Cat Woman, which is a different thing.
That's the first unbelievable thing about this movie, other than the Stonehenge thing. Yeah,
it's literally, we're 3 minutes in and it's the second unbelievable thing.
Yeah. Is that you have a Halloween mask company making 3 masks, and a dumb fucking jingle on TV is making kids across the United States go nuts for these fucking masks. And like every single kid has these masks.
At this point, we don't know it's nationwide. At this point, we don't. Mm-hmm. Because there are local jingles and stuff that just, like, if it's a local television commercial, like, stuff just that you see all the time. Like, in Milwaukee, we have this law firm that advertises during fucking everything, especially during sports events. And so it's like everyone knows the one call, that's all, because that's his thing. So you do have those like local commercials. I believe that, but I do think that the 3 masks is key. That's not. I mean, I'm sure that's a budget thing that they, we need to make a lot of these masks, and but let's only make 3. But there's also, these masks are designed by, what's his name, Don Post or something Post. As far as anyone who designs Halloween masks go, he's famous. He's like the legendary Halloween mask designer. Among others, I believe he designed the William Shatner Captain Kirk mask, which became the Michael Myers mask. He also, I know, did the classic Tor Johnson mask, which you see in the background in some scene in this, when they go to the guy's store. Maybe it's Ted Post. One of those posts, either Don or Ted, is the director of Hang 'em High, which is a Clint Eastwood Western. The other one is the Halloween mask designer. One of them's that one. The 3 masks, we've got Pumpkin, Skull, we've got Witch.
Yeah.
Which one are you going with? You're a kid in 1982. Which mask do you want?
Skull. Though Pumpkin does look good.
I would go Pumpkin. I understand we're complaining about the 3 masks. There only being 3 masks, but you do see later on that these kids accessorize the shit out of these things, which is great for them. Which I think that's what you would kind of need to do.
Yeah.
So you could throw a witch hat on top of the pumpkin hat or pumpkin mask or something,
I remember there's one very brief scene where there's a kid walking past the camera and he's got the skull mask on, but he's dressed like a clown.
Yeah.
But still, 3 masks? Come on.
Do a skull mask and then dress like Keith Richards. So anyways, Dr. Dan Chalice gets called into the hospital. He goes in there, and it's the gentleman who collapsed at the gas station who was brought in. So this guy is like almost catatonic. He says a few things about like they're all going to kill us all or something. Yeah, he says some. But so they end up giving him a tranquilizer, I suppose this wing of the hospital is being worked by 2 people. There's a doctor, there's a nurse, which is crazy. But there's no one at the hospital, so no patients in this area, so that's fine. A gentleman in a suit comes into the hospital. He sneaks around, eventually gets into the room with this guy and the patient, and he kills him by... I thought he poked his eyes out, but we have a line later about someone pulled the guy's skull apart.
Yeah, well, and that's what I thought he was doing at first too. But then you see what he's doing is he's got his fingers in his eye sockets.
Yeah, there's a pulling at the end of it.
Yeah, and then he pops his eye sockets and nasal cavity out, which is pretty gross.
Alerted to the death and to the intruder, Dr. Chalice chases after this guy as he's leaving. We see this guy get into a car, douse himself with gasoline, and then go full Tibetan monk as he lights himself on fire, which explodes the car, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's a great shot. It's awesome.
Yeah. So, shit has literally hit the fan, and then at some point, Ellie, who's the daughter of the dead guy, the first dead guy, the dead hospital patient guy, comes in and just no one knows what the fuck is happening, right? And then we see that apparently the last 5 or 6 days, Dr. Chalice has just spent drinking because he's just hanging out at a bar when Ellie comes in, introduces herself, and talks to him. And apparently she's been doing some research. Well, she knows, first of all, that Dr. Chalice was among the last people to see him alive. She asks if he said anything, but she's done some research. So the guy... He owned a Halloween store, or maybe just a store, but they sold a lot of Halloween stuff.
Yeah, he owned a toy store.
Not long before he died, he had gone to Santa Mira, which is a town kind of in the middle of nowhere. It used to be an old rural town, but now it is where the Silver Shamrock factory is. And Silver Shamrock, despite only making 3 Halloween masks, is like an empire. Not just in the Halloween market, but they're just like... They're like Google or Amazon. But the 2 of them plan to go to Santa Mira, and it's pretty clear. It's never vocalized, but you get the impression Dr. Chalice just is avoiding his wife.
Yeah, have we already mentioned that they're divorced?
No, we haven't. But I guess so I guess I should be phrasing it that he's avoiding his kids, really.
Yeah.
No, you're right. We haven't mentioned that they're divorced, but. Yeah, it's just a weird relationship. Again, you just this is not your typical protagonist. There's also, because he's on the phone, he's telling her that he's got to go out of town on some medical conference or something, and then he hangs up the phone and he's walking towards Ellie's car and he's just got this 6-pack of beer.
Yeah.
It's just really funny.
Yeah, well, it's also weird because from that point onwards, you know that he's into Ellie.
I actually think we can watch this movie and say, oh yeah, he's into Ellie because she's an attractive woman. I actually don't think there's anything really suggesting that about the 2 in terms of Tom Atkins' performance or whatever until they start making out, which almost makes it weirder to me that the romance literally comes out of nowhere. Obviously, you're saying that maybe Ellie's not into him, but that he's into her. I suppose that's implied just in the why else would he go with her on this?
Yeah.
Adventure, unless it's really just an excuse to drink beer away from his kids. I do think that's as much a possibility as anything.
Hey, it's a great excuse, to be honest.
Yes, it's a fascinating character, Dr. Dan Chalice, but I do love the way Tom Atkins plays him, because Tom Atkins has this just no-nonsense kind of bluntness about him. I believe Tom Atkins is this highly functioning alcoholic.
He reminds me of the fella who plays the sheriff in Stranger Things.
Sure. What's that guy's name? No, I know what you mean, because he has kind of the same middle-aged kind of half schlubby, half badass kind of thing about him.
Yeah, and he's also just kind of like tired and annoyed with a bunch of people's bullshit, you know?
Sure,
like...
yeah. And, I mean, obviously Stranger Things, there's not an original bone in Stranger Things' body. This could easily be, that could have been going
this
for
could
a
have easily
Halloween
been Tom
3
Atkins,
thing.
yeah.
They get to Santa Mira. They stay at a motel. We learn briefly that the town was founded sometime in the 19th century. It was a big farming town. Saw a lot of Irish immigrants, and then this guy named Conall Cochran comes in, builds the Silver Shamrock. At first it's a toy company, then it just really takes off, and then we learn later on he ended up firing everybody who worked there before, and then bringing in his own workers.
Yeah.
There's a line about it like, oh, this is an old... I think he calls it like a company town or something, because they're driving around there. They feel like nothing is happening in this town, and we ultimately see why. But essentially, there's not any jobs in this town. It's Silver Shamrock, or you run the motel, or that's it.
Well, and that's the other weird thing about this movie. One, why did they pick Irish people to be the bad guys?
Because Samhain.
Okay.
No, I mean, because Samhain, I don't think it was all Irish. I mean, it's like a Celtic thing, so it was probably on all of the British Isles, but I think America hears Celtic and they only think Irish because, you know, Boston Celtics, stuff like that. You know, you don't think of, because you don't think of, you know, let alone pre-Norman England. This is pre-Saxon England even, whereas the Celtics, you know, the Celtic peoples were. But, you know, so I think that's why Irish. Also, you know, 1982, Irish people were violent at this time. Let's be perfectly honest about that. I mean, it's the elephant in the room.
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up.
Yeah, this is not a pleasant time. You know, whether you want to argue it's justified or not. This was Irish violence was on a lot of people's minds, I think, in 1982. Right? Isn't this right around? They tried to bomb Thatcher right around sometime in the early 80s, I think.
Oh, I wish they'd got her.
A lot of people do. A lot of people do.
All kinds of stuff was going on. So let me ask you this. If you're going to make a movie that's set in the Halloween season, and you're going to have a company that makes Halloween costumes and sells them all over the United States, and there's like there's an evil plot behind that, why are you calling the company the Silver Shamrock? Because you could have called it like the Purple Pumpkin or something, you know?
They do mention it starts as a toy company. Well, first of all, and I want to address this because this will have something to do with last week. When we were listing urban legends, I mentioned the alligator in the sewer. I forgot to mention, possibly even more than the alligators in the sewer, the most classic urban legend, and that is the razor blades and the Halloween candy.
Yes, yeah, that's a good one, yeah.
I do want to mention...
Though that did happen in Niagara Falls when I was a kid.
Did it really, though? Or because that's what they address in urban legend, where everyone says they know of a story, but then it's... anyways, whatever. You're full of it. I don't give a shit. But I guess I bring that up to say that, like, if I was structuring this, if I was writing this movie, I wanted, like, an evil Halloween businessman to want to murder children. Spoilers, because that's what we get into later. But I would probably go the Halloween candy route. I'm just saying that's what I would have done. I'm not. That's not a complaint. I'm just saying, like...
Well, see, and I agree with you, because I was thinking the same thing. Why don't you poison the candy, or...
Yeah, does Stonehenge really need to be involved here is the question.
Well, then here's the thing. They call it Season of the Witch, but there's really no witches involved. There's like...
The word witchcraft is spoken once.
Once.
I believe once.
Yeah, once. And it's not even witchcraft. It's more like pagan.
To be fair, to a lot of people, to people that don't know better, paganism and witchcraft are the same thing. I mean, that's just... It's not true, but that's just what a lot of people... Yeah. I'm not sure I know the difference.
In regards to this movie, you could have had a candy company called the Candy Cauldron that was run by a bunch of witches that are like 1,000 years old,
true.
And they're just going to put this plan into motion to poison all the children in America or something, you know?
Why limit it to America?
Oh, yeah, exactly. The world. Go for, Dr. Evil. Do the world.
Go for Margaret Thatcher's children. Did she even have children?
Probably not. She was the Iron Lady.
Well, she was married, though, because we see Dennis in For Your Eyes Only.
Now, one more complaint about this movie. Season of the Witch, but they don't use the song anywhere in the movie.
You're talking about the Donovan song.
Yes, Donovan, yeah.
Could have been a rights issue, who knows? There's also a film called Season of the Witch. There are 2 films I can think of called Season of the Witch. One, starring Nicolas Cage. It's like a epic fantasy, like sword fighting thing.
Oh, yeah. I
saw it. Don't remember a damn thing about it. Maybe Ron Perlman's in it. I don't know. Just Nicolas Cage fighting with the sword, whatever. Then there's also a film from the early 70s from director George A. Romero. I don't know if it's like, he made it around the time of the Crazies, so it might have been his follow-up to Night of the Living Dead or something. Not a half-bad movie, but it's not a horror movie. It's like this drama that has some witchcraft in it. But I think some distributor or something was like watching the movie and is like, hey, this is pretty good, but we can't sell this because it's just like a boring drama. So why don't you throw some hardcore sex scenes in there, make it a porno? And he's just like, no. And so they just released it as it was, and as a result, it made no money. But it's not a bad movie.
Well, same with this movie. It made no money.
Well, that's okay. I wanted to address this first of all. All right, I can pull up the exact numbers, or the Wikipedia numbers. Okay, Halloween 3 made $14.4 million on a $2.5 million budget. Okay, so the argument or whatever, the story goes. I mean, it made money, but it didn't do as well as they wanted it to. It didn't do as well as the previous 2 Halloween movies. So they're like, okay, let's go back to Michael Myers. Mm-hmm. So what did I say? 14.5 million on a
Yeah.
Okay, so 14.4 like on 2.5.
Yeah.
Halloween 4 comes out. We get Michael Myers. He's back. He's back, baby. $5 million budget, so bigger budget. $17.8 million box office take. So virtually no change in terms of, did we need to abandon the anthology format so soon? Because it feels like until obviously 2018, it feels like the Michael Myers sequels after Halloween 2 were not blockbusters by any means, So I do think it's funny that this movie gets the reputation for like, oh, it was a flop and everything. It's like, it did about as well as the other ones for the most part.
I didn't know that. And again, when we started the discussion of this movie, I said that I liked the idea of anthology movies, all about Halloween time, the season of Halloween. And I wish that they had kept that, because that could have been really, really interesting. Instead of just a fucking dude with a Captain Kirk mask on running around for 8-9 movies.
Well, we do get some Samhain stuff eventually in the series, some witchcraft type stuff, but that's when they're really jumping the shark. We do get a reference to Samhain in Halloween 2. Samhain was the sort of the Celtic precursor, I guess you could say, to Halloween, because you have most holidays that we still celebrate today, they had their origins in like in the Roman religion or something. Christmas was the solstice. Juvenalia, I think, became something like, you have all these like Roman things, and then Halloween was a Celtic one, or a Celtic origin. I don't know how factual the whole like human sacrifice on Samhain is. I'm sure it probably happened. I don't feel like it happened in the numbers that this film reports it as. But anyways, I wanted to bring that up. Yeah. It's refreshing. Maybe it's because we have an Irish actor here in Dan O'Herlihy, who we haven't gotten to, but he pronounces the word correctly, Samhain. Donald Pleasance in Halloween 2 looks at that word written on a chalkboard and is like, Samhain. And it's like, no, fuck you. I mean, because Irish language, I'm not saying I know Irish. I don't speak Irish. I can say a few sentences.
But you are Irish.
I'm German too. I don't know a lick of German. But the Irish language is not, at least not intuitive in terms of like looking at the pronunciation. It's probably not as bad as Welsh, but it's very, I mean, it's in the same linguistic family where like I can look at a word that's in Portuguese or, any of the Romance languages and have a decent idea of how to pronounce it. And then I look at like something in Irish and it's like, oh, I think this is how it's pronounced. And then there's just like, it's just way off. That's just the Irish language. So I understand like a casual like myself or something seeing the word Samhain and being like, oh, Samhain, of course. But it's like, no, if you're going to put that in the movie, have the guy say it right. Would have been a nice introduction. A lot of children watching Halloween 2 could have learned a little bit about the Irish language, if Donald Pleasance said it right. Anyways, okay, so here at this Irish-run motel, a couple other people are staying there. Well, first of all, Chalice and Ellie pretend to be husband and wife so as to not raise suspicions. Then we have the Kupfer family, who is in an RV. For some reason, they're staying at a motel as well. I thought that's why you have an RV, is to not have to do that. So we got Buddy Kupfer, whatever his wife's name is, and then his son, who's Little Buddy.
Yeah.
And then we have some other lady. Was her name Betty or something? She's like a business lady.
Yeah.
No, Betty is the wife. Betty is Buddy's wife.
Marge. That's it. It's Marge.
There was some problem with her order, with her Silver Shamrock order. And the Kupfers, Buddy Kupfer, is a salesman, we learn later. He has sold more Silver Shamrock masks than anyone in the country. So they are there sort of as on like a goodwill, like, here, come visit the factory thing. It's never addressed by any of the characters, but we do learn that the town has a 6 o'clock curfew. The voice of the curfew announcer, and I think it's the voice on a couple other things, is apparently Jamie Lee Curtis.
Oh, really?
I wouldn't have known that. That's what Wikipedia tells me. So after the town is shut down, Dr. Chalice and Ellie may or may not sleep together here initially, because Chalice says, I think Chalice is trying to be polite. He's probably recognized I could be this woman's grandfather, and he's like, hey, we should probably get a second room or something. And then she's like, no, that would look weird, it would look suspicious. He's like, yeah, well, I'll sleep on the floor. And then she's like, where would you like to sleep? And then they just start making out. I mean, they probably sleep together there. But later on, Chalice goes out for a walk. He meets a guy that used to work in town. He says something about like wanting to throw Molotov cocktails at the factory. And then after Chalice goes back to the motel room, this poor gentleman is attacked by a couple of men in suits who pull his head off, which is amazing. And it's
really cool.
It's shot in a way where you don't see everything. It's shot kind of tastefully. It's great lighting and great cinematography in this movie. It's Dean Cundy, the same guy that did the cinematography on the first 2 Halloween movies, but still really gory too. I mean, it's weird. This is not a slasher film, and this is so much gorier than the first Halloween movie. I think it's probably even gorier than Halloween 2.
Well, and the thing about this head decapitation that's great is there's this kind of like this wide shot taken from somewhere in like the scrap heap of the 2 suited men standing there, and the headless corpses are just shooting a fountain of blood out of the top of it between the 2 of them, and then it falls over. And then it just cuts away. It's great. It's kind of comical actually, but it just looks awesome.
Yeah, also the guy, I believe it's the guy who pulls off the head, is Dick Warlock, who played Michael Myers in Halloween 2. He's also a stuntman who's stunt coordinator on this film. He's stunt coordinator a couple other movies that we've covered. And I know he worked on Body Double.
Dick Warlock isn't a real name.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a fake name, but it's a real name. Dick Warlock, I think, Penis Wizard, as the synonymous, anything like that.
Penis Wizard, Vulva Witch.
Amazing man, that Dick Warlock. He might have worked on The Stuff as well. I'm not 100% sure. I know he's worked on a few movies that we've done. I haven't mentioned him yet, though. So, while Chalice and Ellie are sleeping with each other again, Marge is fiddling with her mask, notices, or I guess already, I think. So the mask, on the back of it, there's like a Silver Shamrock
logo
emblem. Kind of reminds me of those things that you put on like the back of your cell phone to kind of like hold it. Those pop sockets, whatever those things are called. Kind of looks like that.
Yeah.
That's come off, and I think that's the problem she's complaining about, but she's fiddling with it. Then it zaps her, and it blows a hole in her face, essentially. This is really nasty stuff.
It's disgusting.
Absolutely disgusting.
For anybody who hasn't seen this movie, it looks like she gets hit square in the mouth with like this laser beam.
Yeah.
And when you peel a banana and you have like the peels hanging open? It's like somebody peeled her lips away from her teeth. That's what it looks like.
So Marge gets taken away. She's still, we're told she's alive, but we don't really know. But she gets taken away. She gets put in a Silver Shamrock van and gets taken away and we're told to the factory because they have the best medical care there. And then this is where we finally meet Conal Cochran, played by Irish actor Dan O'Herlihy. He's in RoboCop. I've seen him probably in a few other things. He's awesome in this movie. There's no way around it.
I was going to say, I couldn't tell you what else he's been in.
But he is amazing. He's very like soft-spoken, polite. He has a very soft Irish accent, like a
nice Irish lilt.
I was tempted to say like he has the accent of like an Irish person who's like lived in the United States for 50 years, because I'm sure that's what he actually is at this time. Except I have a couple of cousins from Ireland who have lived in the United States for 60 plus years, and their accents are as thick as hell. So I mean, sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. You know, they still sound like they're living in Ireland and everything. So, but no, you can tell that he's Irish, but it's very soft, and he's got kind of I would almost describe his voice as like it's kind of deep, but he seems to soften it, just like to sound very polite. And I think he pulls this off well. And then when he gets more threatening later on, he also pulls that off well, of course. But the next day, Ellie and Dr. Chalice go to the Silver Shamrock factory to continue their investigation. Or they're basically trying to say, like, okay, we don't know what happened to this order. And they say, like, oh, no, that order was picked up. And it's like, okay, did you remember anything about the guy that picked it up? Like, where was he going? Like, because they're still trying to find out what happened to her dad. While they're there at the factory, they run into the Kupfer family again. And then the Kupfer family is about to be taken on a tour of the factory. And so they request that Ellie and Dr. Chalice, who I think are going by Smith.
Yeah.
They ask that they join them. So, you know, the factory tour, we see them going through like the pouring the molds and all that stuff. Then little Buddy wants a mask, but Conal Cochran stops him and says, no, these masks haven't gone through final processing yet, and he gives him another mask, this one having been wrapped in plastic. And then there's some, like, after that part of the tour, Buddy's dad is like, final processing, what's he on about? It's just a mask. And then they're like, eh. So they ask Conal Cochran, and he's like, it's just final processing, just a little bit of this, a little bit of that, it's just a quality inspection, right? But obviously we can tell, like, okay, something's going on in that final processing room, especially we see this, like, no admittance sign and everything. So the tour, I guess, concludes, or at least it concludes for Ellie and Chalice, who go to leave. At this point, they notice a lot of people in suits just kind of watching them, and then they see a big, like, garage door open, and Ellie recognizes her dad's car there. And she's about to go there and see it up close, but then the people in suits stop her. Somewhere around this point is when I kind of realized, those people in the suits never actually talk. Like, there's something going on,
Well, I mean, to be honest, like, I kind of figured something was going on from after from.
He rips the head off, sure, yeah, but wait, which part were you saying? Because I think the. I guess he breaks the skull. Yeah, they do a couple almost supernatural.
I was going to say, something weird's going on when a guy walks into a car calmly and lights himself on fire and blows up.
He's just a Tibetan monk. Tibetan monks, do they take vows of silence? They might.
This Irishman's just hired a bunch of Tibetan monks to work at his factory and be the Muslim.
Yeah, I know. I mean, is this how they tried to take out Thatcher in the Brighton hotel bombing? Was it just a... It was just a robot who lit himself on fire in a car? Might have been.
Robotic Tibetan monks.
Robotic IRA Tibetan monks. Anyways, okay, so we've been kind of skipping over this thing, but there's a part of the plot is Chalice is in close contact with the coroner because he's trying to figure out what the hell is up with the guy that blew himself up in the car, and the coroner, who's a lady that he kind of hits on a little bit. So again, it's just kind of like, who doesn't this guy sleep with? But
his ex-wife.
She thinks there's some mistake because it seems that everything that's been sent into her office has just been car parts. There doesn't seem to be any like body parts there. There's a few checkups with her throughout the movie, and she never really knows what's going on. But she gets killed eventually by a robot who breaks into the coroner's office and stabs her with like a drill or something, some kind of medical tool maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
For sure, it's just like a hand drill, and I'm like, why is that?
Yeah, I thought it was. I didn't think it was a medical thing, but I don't know. I'm giving the movie a little bit of credit here. I didn't remember it being a scalpel, but like, yeah, it's just a coroner thing. What are they doing? I don't know. They're fixing the phone line in the coroner's office, maybe something. Who knows? After this factory tour, Chalice and Ellie go back home. They get split up, and I'm not sure when does Chalice go for like a walk or something.
He goes to try to call the coroner from the motel desk phone, but it's been disconnected.
Because, well, at this point, I think they're also trying to call the police, too, because they've seen the car. So I think it's probably the police more than the coroner, but I get it. He's on the phone with the coroner a lot. So then he gets back into the room. Ellie's not there, but then all the people in suits break into his hotel room or motel room. He escapes, and he goes running and hiding. He eventually makes his way to the factory, which is where we see that Ellie is being held captive. She has been captured by these robots. I mean, we haven't technically learned they're robots yet, but, you know.
Yeah, goo-filled robots.
The reveal happens here just in a minute. It's actually a really awesome reveal. Tom Atkins gets into the factory. He opens the door, sees a woman knitting, and is like, hey, I need your help. And he shakes her a bit, and then her head falls off. And we see that there's all these gears and stuff. Kind of like an automaton type robot, like not really like a modern, not a Boston Dynamics robot. You know, this is like an old-timey kind of thing.
Boston Dynamics, yeah.
Right, you know, those little...
creepy dogs.
Well, the creepy dogs, but no, it's some Japanese company that makes the guys that look like astronauts. They look like spacemen.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
What is it called? Like Asimo or something like that? Was that it? Asimo,
yeah, I don't know,
robot?
but no, you're right. Boston Dynamics does the dog. I forgot about that. I was picturing them doing the astronaut, but no, you're right. Great reveal. Then he gets in a fight with one of the suit people, and he's getting like strangled, but then he's able to get on top of the guy, and then he punches through his chest into just a bunch of yellow goo, and he pulls out a bunch of cords and stuff, and then there's goo coming out of this guy's mouth. So, okay, all the people in suits are robots. We now know that. Also, I just like the detail. Again, we get this knitting lady, because Conal Cochran enters the room just after this, and he says something about like her being a classic or something. It'll be hard to duplicate that. And I do like, because we see the automaton, like very old-fashioned type of robotics, and then this other guy that he's just punched through all these cords, it feels more modern. So I kind of like that little detail. Looks like he's been working on these robots for quite some time or something. We get the reveal of the evil plan here, which is a very long reveal. It's a layered reveal. There's layers to it. It goes on for a long time, but this is my favorite stuff in the movie.
Like an ogre.
He takes him into the final processing room. He reveals, obviously, that he's built these robots, and I think he says something about, like, you know, just the final part of it. It's like it's not too different from making masks anyway. So in the final processing room, we see the Stonehenge piece. Just standing in the middle of it. There's all these people doing research on it, scraping parts off of it. There's a lot of computers, or at least for the 80s, this was a lot of computers, I'll say.
Yeah, there's like 3 computers and like 15 television screens.
Listen, there's enough to get someone to the moon. You know, at least there was in 1969, right?
Yeah.
In terms of just the memory, it's like I feel like those computers were so much weaker than my laptop is now, but my laptop still freaks out if I try to play a game of Dead by Daylight, and it's like somehow the processing on those old things got people to the moon. It's crazy.
Like, it's insane.
But anyways... So the first part of the reveal is I've got robots working for me. The second part of the reveal is I smuggled in Stonehenge, or part of it. And there's a kind of a self-aware line where he's like, "Here's Stonehenge. You wouldn't believe how we got it here." But then he doesn't elaborate on it at all, which is great because there is no explanation you could possibly write that makes sense. Oh, yes, I see how they stole Stonehenge.
No, exactly. Yeah, you're not lifting it away with a helicopter.
It could be like King Kong versus Godzilla, where they do the balloons. They pick up King Kong.
That's right. Yeah.
Please note that most versions of King Kong just skip the part where they transport King Kong from Skull Island to Manhattan. He's just back in Manhattan, and don't ask questions, because they also, like the writers of Halloween 3, kind of realized it's kind of hard to, truly make this believable. So that's part 2 of the reveal. Part 3 is the demonstration, and this is done on the poor old Kupfer family, who get taken into a room that's made to look like a living room, but in actuality there's nothing to it. There's no windows or anything.
Living room, more like death room.
Oh, you. But yeah, so they get locked in. They're starting to, I think the wife is saying, like, this is starting to feel a little weird, let's be honest. But like Kupfer has, like, you feel bad for him, because he has like so much faith in Connell Cochran and the stupid company. He even has a line earlier where he's like, I just wish, you know how I plan ahead. I just wish he would take future orders. And I love that little detail. It's like, he's not taking future orders. We know why. The television starts on. It's running the not the commercial. It's not the Silver Shamrock commercial. This is the actual special. This is the big giveaway that they always advertise. Yeah. Be sure to watch the big giveaway at 9. It's kind of like a strobe, but it's the really repetitive music, and I think it's the pumpkin, right? It's just the closer on the jack-o'-lantern, and you see kind of the flashing lights. And the whole thing is you're supposed to watch this wearing your mask, which I shouldn't say no child. No child over the age of 5 would watch television with a mask on. I think when you're like really young, you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm never taking this off, maybe. But anyways, little buddy wearing his mask right in front of the television while the 2 parents are arguing. He drops over dead, and then out of his mask, and thus out of his head, come bugs and all these bugs. We did
bugs
see a bug.
And all these bugs.
We did see a bug come out of Marge's mouth earlier.
Yes, yeah.
And then we get some snakes too, which, as a big fan of snakes, I always appreciate. And the snakes are what kill the Kupfers. I don't think we see what takes out Marge, but we see the snake bite Big Buddy in like the shin.
First off, this scene is really
amazing,
yeah, but it's also graphic without being graphic, because the mask starts to kind of rot off Buddy's face.
Yes.
And it looks really
almost looks
neat.
like it's melting.
And then as soon as he hits the floor, you just have a multitude of insects just start pouring out of his mouth, which you don't even see his mouth. All you can see is his eye through like this half-rotted, melted mask.
It's mostly just the mask, but the mask is a substitute for his head here, basically.
The only thing I was thinking of the whole time that this was going on was like, what a convoluted and like slow way to kill people.
Oh, I know. Like... That's why it's amazing. That's why it's so great. It's so stupid. It's just incredible. Okay, well, first of all, we got to talk about it. I mean, they just killed a kid. This is not something that happens in a lot of movies, let alone it's usually not the plot of movies. Essentially, the plot, the bad guy's plan is to kill every child in America, which is awesome. It's so cool. And of course, famously, I don't like children, but that's beside the point. Like, this is just so dark, and it's so silly. There's something just so awesome about it, too. I guess we haven't established all of it, but there's a piece of Stonehenge that goes into every mask, and that's the final processing.
Yeah, and like Stonehenge, because
Stonehenge has a magic power.
Yeah, like a pagan demonic power.
I accept it because there's been long speculation of like what actually is Stonehenge. There's been rumors for centuries, if not millennia, of that it had some kind of pagan witchcraft kind of power. We don't really know. Years and years and years ago, we're talking the medieval world, they would see these like standing stones, because you see those all over Ireland and England, because those ancient Celtic people put these. We don't even know how they did it, especially with Stonehenge, because Stonehenge is so heavy. But you see these like standing stones that just don't seem like they should be able to stand, and they seem like they're really heavy and stuff. And they thought they were like entrances to like the fairy world, right? Because Middle Ages, the fairy world it's not like Tinkerbell. It's not what we would consider fairies today, but fairies were like tricksters and stuff. They were kind of wicked and evil and stuff, and it's kind of like, so there's always been speculation about Stonehenge being something. I think we kind of mostly no, it's some kind of astrological purpose, right? Isn't that kind of the consensus?
In the last 100 or so years, I think it's accepted that it is something to do with the passage of time and the seasons, to stand for the solstice rituals, but also any kind of like ceremonial space. There's no doubt that it was used by pagan peoples and that it's been viewed as a religious site for several thousand years. Whether it's full of demonic energy?
Yeah, I guess that's the thing.
Know.
We don't, but there's always this kind of like, oh, anything old and it's a religion we don't understand. There's something wicked or something witchcrafty about it. That's just how the world works. At any rate, so this is when we get the full reveal, and this is Dr. Chalice is bound here. He's in front of the television, which is showing Halloween, because that was the thing. We saw an ad earlier for the 1978 film which they call the Immortal Classic Halloween, which
yeah,
that's pretty freaking bold. Just 4 years later, and also when the people working on that movie are working on this one, that's kind of, I don't know if that's John Carpenter's ego. Maybe that's director Tommy Lee Wallace, who's just like, here, I'll put this in there and hope he doesn't tell me to get rid of it.
Or they're just using it as like an in-joke. They're like, oh, isn't this kind of funny? Ha ha ha.
That's the most likely thing. But still, 4 years. 4 years Immortal Classic. That's like, what are we... That's like if we were to say Mandy is an Immortal Classic or something,
Yeah, well, I mean, people were walking out of theaters, right, when Halloween came out because it was too spooky.
I don't know. Your mom was. I don't know.
If she's a big bitch. What can I say about
Jesus. I hope bugs come out of her face.
Yeah, take that, Mom.
Anyway, so this is the full detail of the plan. This is where he talks about Samhain, and the last glorious Samhain took place a couple thousand years ago.
3,000 to be specific.
And then he's talked about all the child murders, or child sacrifice, and animal sacrifice. And so he wants to basically recreate that. And why? I guess he hates children, but also there is one line about how the planets are in alignment again. So in theory, the time is right for the first time in 3,000 years that the planets have aligned in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I guess we haven't said this, but we see that Ellie is in a room, and she's also bound. It's like 7:50 or so. I think it's 7:49 I have written down.
7:48. When
he gets stuck there. Well, first of all, I just want to go back to fantastic speech by Gavin O'Hurley. He plays it so well. He's so creepy, but he's so like controlled. Like this is like an evil genius type. But I also love, because Halloween is on TV in the background, so we get the classic Halloween score kind of scoring this scene, which is really, really effective. It's the slow or soft kind of piano music. It's not the Halloween theme, but it's like the scenes of when it's just like Laurie walking around, kind of like looking around. Perfectly accentuates this scene, too.
It's like the perfect marriage of score and script, and you get like this powerfully creepy...
And performance.
Yeah, and you get this powerfully creepy scene.
Like I said, this chunk of the movie, which is about 20 minutes, probably less than that, just the plan, the reveal of the plan, is probably my favorite stuff in the movie. I think the scene with little Buddy, arguably the most effective scene in the movie, probably the most famous scene.
Mm-hmm.
If you've seen snakes and bugs come out of a child's head, you're not likely to forget it.
Yeah.
Even though, as you were saying, it was shot kind of tastefully, where it's not super gory or anything, but the suggestion is there. The suggestion is still powerful and disturbing and gross. Yeah, so I love this chunk of the movie, but following this is when Chalice frees himself. I think this is arguably the roughest patch of the movie here, though, too. Chalice frees himself. He goes and rescues Ellie. They get to the final processing room, which is, again, the computer room and the Stonehenge room. And he sneaks around and is just easily able to, like, fool around with the control panel and stuff. And eventually he has the television special play, which is what killed Buddy earlier. And so everyone's watching it, in which it doesn't kill them because they're not wearing the masks. But then he dumps down a big box because at this point he's up in the rafters like Marty McFly in Back to the Future Part 2. He pours down a box of all of these chips, with the logo thing. And then, because they react to the television, all the robots get zapped. So there's a reaction going on with all the TVs, which is this big ring of electricity. Conal Cochran, who's standing in between sort of the ring of televisions and Stonehenge, looks up at them and seems to acknowledge what's about to happen, because he kind of looks up and just slowly claps, does a slow clap of respect, I guess. And then he gets zapped to death.
Yeah. Well, he gets
zapped into oblivion.
Yes. Yeah. And I just don't understand.
Not the most satisfying.
No. And why? Why did it zap him?
And why?
Why did the ring of TVs become a ring of light that turned into a laser? And why did Stonehenge shoot out a laser? The Stonehenge Bluestone shoot out a laser. I don't like.
It's. I think they wrote themselves into a hole, or wrote themselves into a wall with just how fucking crazy this story is. Like, what do you do with it? The Stonehenge zaps someone to death. What are you gonna do? But at the same time, it's kind of like
zap someone to death.
But it's also it's you can manufacture a way to get rid of the robots, right? Because they're robots and it's a fictional being, and it's not the most satisfying to watch. But sure, microchips reacting to the television zap the robots. I accept it, but Conal Cochran's a person.
He could have had bugs and snakes come out of his mouth.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
you could have. Oh my God, this would have been. I don't think this would have been any different, I guess, than how those masks work. But I was thinking you just shove the microchip in his mouth and then duct tape his mouth shut, and then I guess his head would probably explode from all these bugs and snakes and stuff. But I don't know, maybe we're looking at an NC-17 rated movie if you go over the top with that. But I would have liked to see it, but whatever. The factory is now on fire, which is a beautiful little matte painting kind of thing in the background. But as Chalice and Ellie run away, they get to their car. Then Ellie, who at this point you realize hasn't spoken a goddamn word in an hour, she attacks him, causing him to crash his car. Ellie, at this point, she's been made into a robot, or maybe this is just a robot reconstruction of Ellie. We're not really sure.
Yeah, and we never get the answer.
Never really makes sense. He knocks her head off, but that doesn't keep her from attacking because there's still the spare arm in the car. So, anyways, Chalice just gets the hell out of there. He runs, and he gets to the same gas station that we saw in the opening. This gas station has a television on, and there's kids coming to trick-or-treat, but they stop by because it's just about time for the big giveaways, because it's 9 o'clock, which, they're, first of all, these kids not listening to the propaganda advertising team of Silver Shamrock, because we see earlier, I skipped this part, but there's a wonderful little montage of children getting ready to go out trick-or-treating all throughout the country. They show Omaha, Nebraska, Los Angeles, California, which
Arizona.
That's where they all are, is Los Angeles, California. Yep. But they say Omaha, Nebraska. They say a few other places. Dayton, Ohio is one of them.
New York.
Yeah, they do. New York is the one we see inside the shop, and there's a pumpkin mask on must be an electronic Lazy Susan. It's just spinning around. And I remember first time I saw this movie, I thought that was a modified mask that a kid had that he was putting on top of his head or something. So it's just a way to combine Halloween 3 with The Exorcist would just be awesome. Anyway, and then we do see a scene later when it's kind of getting to dusk, trick-or-treating is over. We see a truck going around with loudspeakers saying, "Okay, folks, okay, kids, it's almost time for the big giveaway. Get home, watch the horror-thon, make sure you watch the big giveaway. Put your masks on." And yeah, so these kids are not listening, not following the rules. Chalice gets on the phone with, I guess, the FCC or probably the local television.
Yeah, I would assume so. I don't know. I don't know if he knows the number for, MSNBC or whatever.
No, it'd be awesome if he got it shut off of all of the regular standard networks, and then it was only showing on HBO, so it only killed the rich kids. That'd be pretty great. So he's on the phone. He's saying, "Okay, you guys got to pull this off the television. I can't really explain, but it's life or death." So the kids stop to watch the TV. They pull it off one network, so the network just says technical difficulties, and then the kid just changes the channel and it's showing on another one. Then he's like, "Okay, it's still on this other channel, and they pull it from that one. So he changes it one more channel, and it's on this last channel. And he's like, no, guys, this is still on channel 3 or whatever. You have to pull it off of channel 3. As the music, the annoying Silver Shamrock music gets louder and louder, he's just screaming and screaming and screaming. And he's like, stop it, stop it.
Yeah.
That's how the movie ends. Presumably, he doesn't get through. Presumably, all the children in America have been killed. And who knows how many parents, depending on how venomous those snakes are.
Yeah. Yeah, depending on how many rattlesnakes come out.
There was a couple snakes. One was a rattlesnake. The first snake you see emerge, I don't think that, whatever snake that is, I don't believe it's venomous.
Yeah, it was like a garter snake or something. But there was like a boa of some kind, and then there was
the
rattlesnake. Yeah. Do you think with this ability to bring forth snakes and critters, you could like repopulate some endangered snake species if you get like the right snakes? You know what I mean?
But these things are created, or they come out of the person's face. So technically, maybe we have a new species of snakes and bugs, all these things. Yeah. Maybe these are not related to anything. And listen, we've got an Irish dude. What does he know about snakes?
Yeah.
They're all gone. They're not in Ireland.
Yeah, rather ironic, St. Patrick banished all the snakes from Ireland. Well, we've got to come out of children, bunch of snakes.
Jim, what did you think of Halloween 3 Season of the Witch?
Despite what a lot of other people say, I really enjoy this movie.
An awful lot of people have come around on this movie, I think. There are still people that don't like it, but a lot of people really respect it and think it's maybe not great, but pretty darn good. I think there's a genuine argument that it's the second best film in the Halloween franchise, which it's honestly a terrible franchise for the most part. So,
my only real point is that, this is a perfectly fine, standalone, non-Halloween related film, and I think it would have... Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's just kind of a shame that I guess both critics and companies deemed an anthology series not to be a worthy pursuit, because I think it could have been something really interesting and special.
Yeah, because how many movie anthology series are there? I don't think there's really any. You have the VHS movies, which each one of those movies is an anthology, and then it also has a series. But that's something we see in television a lot, in the horror and sci-fi genres, the Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits. Mm-hmm. Probably the closest comparison to this. Again, I mentioned the Cloverfield, which, Cloverfield's just a sick practical joke, basically, of a franchise on people. But
yeah,
I do think possibly a good comparison would be American Horror Story, because that's an anthology series, but episode to episode, it's not an anthology, but season to season, it's an anthology. So maybe that would be a worthy comparison.
Something that I thought was honestly going to detract from this movie more than it did was the weird sexual tension and sex between Ellie and Dr. Chalice.
Mm-hmm.
But really, the biggest detriment to this movie, but also something that's kind of fun and quirky, is just the plot, I guess, and the villain's plan. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's so ridiculous that it's laughable, but that's also what makes this movie enjoyable. And I think that's probably what's bringing a lot of people around to it.
Yeah, I think people recognize this as just a wildly original, delightfully weird plot and movie. And you have a villain whose motivations don't make a lick of sense, but he so delights in how evil he is. So there's something fun about that. There's an over-the-top, there's a bit of a kind of a Bond villain quality, which that's what I love about the classic Bond villain. We've kind of gotten away from this in the more realistic Bond movies, but the villain with the over-the-top plan, I'm going to drown the entire world so I can live underwater in my city of Atlantis, in The Spy Who Loves Me or something like that. I also think you mentioned the romance. I agree. On paper, it's creepy. I actually kind of like the bluntness of it, how dumb it is, because I almost think it's funny. Whether or not it's meant to be funny, I don't know.
Yeah.
I also like the idea, again, Tom Atkins as the protagonist. He's a lot older than you would have as your usual protagonist in a movie like this. The character, he's just this drunken weirdo who hates his kids. And to be fair, he does, before he saves Ellie, after he escapes, he does call his ex-wife and tells her to not let the kids watch the thing. But
and she's like, "What are you, drunk?"
Yeah, I don't think that message got extended to the kids, so I think it's safe to say his kids are dead. But
yeah,
it's weird too, because the original Halloween, is as simple as movies get, plot-wise. It could not be more simple. The villain has no motivation. He just kills. There's nothing to it. And then this movie is just like, has the weirdest motivations ever for a villain, and it's just like all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's this mystery movie. It's this weird romance between an elderly man and his daughter, and it's just weird.
Yeah.
It's weird. So, Jim, which of these two movies, The Mummy or Halloween 3, do you prefer?
Halloween 3. I don't think it's that difficult to choose. I mean, it's essentially a B movie, right? It's a B movie with a mainstream movie title.
And an A-movie execution to a certain extent.
Yes.
With the cinematography and some of the makeup effects and stuff.
I do like The Mummy. I thought it was a great movie. But one of the reasons we started this podcast was to highlight B movies and silly, stupid, ridiculous movies with ridiculous plots, and that's exactly what this is. And I love it for it.
I prefer Halloween 3. I think it's relatively close, though, and I do think it's funny, the movies aren't really comparable, because you have one movie that's very kind of standard, and not to say it's, I'm not saying this is a negative, but very normal. We've seen movies like this before, and then Halloween 3, which is just kind of crazy, and it's a little, it's insane that this was kind of a mainstream film. It's got Dino De Laurentiis' name on it. It's Universal Pictures, I think, released it. I mean, it's weird. If I'm going just off of like which movie's more unique, certainly I would take Halloween 3. And I would say the uniqueness applies to why I find it more entertaining, but I do like The Mummy a lot. I just think overall Halloween 3 is more entertaining. It's got more of a kind of an interesting pace. You get that kind of the mystery feel, mixed in with a little bit of a chase and, hide and seek kind of thing. So I like it.
How do you think these two work as a double feature?
Well, specifically as like a Halloween time double feature, I think this is great. And I think it's a good one regardless, but especially around Halloween, because Halloween 3 is one of the perfect Halloween movies. It's just such a weird movie, but it's so Halloween. And those masks, they've kind of become iconic in their own way, especially the pumpkin one, I feel like.
Yes, yeah.
It's just great. But then also, like, The Mummy is classic monster stuff. And even though it's not the Universal monster, my main go-to for, like, Halloween time viewing is, like, every Halloween or every October, I watch a bunch of horror movies. And I watch some movies I haven't seen before, a lot of stuff that I have. But, like, a lot of people, like, around Halloween, like, okay, I need to watch Nightmare on Elm Street because I love that. I need to watch Alien. I need to watch, like, all these, like, these are all my favorite horror movies. For whatever reason, just it's the Universal monster movies for me have just felt the most. They make me feel the most nostalgic, I guess. They make me feel like I don't feel like it's a Halloween until I've watched at least a couple of those Universal monster movies, those classic. And I'm talking more the black and white stuff. But The Mummy, this Mummy, the Hammer films are kind of just an extension of the original classic Universal monster movies, because you have the different actors, but rather than Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney Jr., you have Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, who are just like horror icons in just as much their own right as those folks are. So it's kind of just an extension of that. As a Halloween double feature, awesome. As a normal double feature, still pretty darn good, because you get this really straightforward film with a fantastical element and no robots, and then you get this really, really weird film with a fantastical neo-pagan element and also robots and 60-year-old men sleeping with 20-year-old women and just some weird stuff. But yeah, I think it's an excellent double feature. Jim, what do you think?
Well, I totally agree with you for it being, like, in terms of it being just a normal double feature. I do really like that straightforward kind of old, I don't really want to call it Hollywood, because I guess it isn't Hollywood, but old Hollywood with The Mummy. You
have Bollywood, and, like, I don't think there's a proper, like, Hollywood-type name for, like, the British film industry, is there?
I guess you could call it Old Pinewood. I do like that straightforwardness with that mix of, as you so rightly put it, that fantastical element. And then when you go to Halloween 3, it's just it's insane. Like, it's nuts. Like, the plot's ridiculous. The characters are kind of ridiculous. Everything's over the top. Yeah, I think it's great. I think that's exactly what you want out of a double feature. You want one pretty standard or relatively standard to start off with, and then you want to move to this crazy, mind-numbing thing. strictly speaking,
mind-numbing. This is an engaging film.
Yeah, you're right. Mind-numbing because it's so engaging.
Okay. Overstimulation. It's like,
film,
you know,
yeah.
you have too many parts of your brain operating. You have a seizure or something like it. It's like that. It's a seizure-inducing film.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, old lady automaton. Oh, real people automatons with orange goop. I start seizing. To continue with what you said about a strictly Halloween double feature, it's perfect. It's perfect. You do have those old quote-unquote Hollywood monsters, that kind of like traditional story structure with these fantastic actors, with these horror icons, as you so rightly put it. And then you have this, again, like this crazy movie that tried to be its own thing and unfortunately failed in the eyes of critics.
And audiences.
It's still amazing.
At the time.
Yeah, and audiences.
Yeah. So, Jim, next week we are doing a couple of 80s action movies, including The Delta Force, starring Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin, and Young Rebels, which is by director Amir Shervan. And
exciting lineup.
As always, be sure to rate us on whatever podcasting platform you listen to us on, rate and review us. Yeah, also check out our Patreon, where you can hear the episodes earlier than everybody else, as well as have access to commentary tracks that Jim and I have recorded to watch alongside, or to listen to alongside, some of your favorite horror and action movies. We will have, later this season, we will have patrons pick a double feature that we do. So be sure to follow us on Patreon just for those exclusive privileges alone.
Also, I think on Patreon, we also have extended versions of our normal podcast.
Yes, we do. That's a good point. Thank you.
Because I'm looking at this one, and it's 3 hours and 7 minutes.
Yeah, well, listen, there's nonsense that'll be cut. Yeah, this is going to be an extended episode for sure. But yeah, thanks for joining me, Jim, and thank you for joining us, dear listeners. Have a lovely Halloween. Watch out for those razor blades. Watch out for those Canadian boa constrictors sneaking out of toilets. All that stuff.
Happy Halloween, everybody. Eat lots of candy, and don't get sick from eating it. Oh, eat some candy apples. Those are my favorite.
Why do you want people to eat them? Don't you want them all for yourself?
I want to live vicariously through all the good people that listen to our podcast.
I want to live vicariously through Connell Cochran and just murder several children this Halloween. That's what I want to do.
Oh, my God. Happy Halloween, everybody.